Hello and welcome to the latest Guild One Name Studies webinars. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I've just got a few slides to run through before we hand over to our speaker for today. So I'm hoping you can see that the slides have just moved. Yeah. Okay. So first up, we've got the Guild website. So if you're a non-member, welcome. You've probably been to the Guild website because otherwise you wouldn't be here because you went to register. But should you want to, that is the address of one-name.org. Okay, so if you want to hear about our webinars, either what's coming up or ones that we've already covered, you can use those two links there to have a look at them. If you want to download the handout, there is a handout. It says handouts of 1 of 5. There's only one there for the moment, and it's actually that slide, so that you've got the link should you want to go and explore later on. But you just need to go to the one-name.org website, click on the events, and then follow it through to the webinars. As we get nearer to 2023, it will just remain as webinars, but you'll be able to access all the previous webinars. And if you want to join our non-member mailing list, you can do so, and that is the link there. So to find your way around the screen, on the right hand side you should have got a little dashboard. So remember, you can hear and see us, but we can't hear or see you. So if you do have a problem, you need to use the Q&A, and I'll show you in a moment just where that is so that you're able to put a comment. But first of all, just to say that please make sure that you've got your speakers up, especially if you're using a headset. Sometimes when you put it back, you plug your headset in, the speakers don't necessarily switch over with you. So just be sure that, and if you do have any problems, send a message for the Q&A and I'll pick that up. This is recording and will be available on the website probably within 3 to 5 days, but sometimes it's a little bit later. But if you do have just a problem, or you've even got a suggestion for a further webinar at some point, you can always email us at webinars@one-name.org. So any questions? So on the right hand side of that little dashboard, you've got one that says questions, and you can just type in there anything that you want to ask. Handouts. Further down on that little dashboard, you've got the section at the very bottom where it says handouts, and in there's just the one document, and it's in fact it is that slide with the links on. So is excellent if you can just you can grab hold of that, then you'll be able to access it later on. So tonight we're going to be joined by Paul Howze of the Howze One Name Study. And when I started my One Name Studies journey a long time ago, the Howze study didn't exist. But fast forward a little bit and the Howze study existed, and I was able to explore what other guild members were doing with their study. And this was one that I particularly had on my favourites list for a variety of reasons, and certainly it's one that often features in my teaching when I'm teaching Pharos courses. So I'm going to hand across to Paul. So I'm basically just going to sort the magic out in terms of sharing the screen with him so that he can share his slides, and then we'll get cracking.
Thanks, Julie. Can you see my overhead here?
Yep, I can see the slides. Perfect. Are you keeping your camera on? You can if you wish, or
I'll leave it on, it's fine.
okay.
All right, let's go.
Over to you.
An apology because I didn't produce a handout for this session. Hopefully it'll be pretty obvious as you go through, but we have quite a wide variety of people watching this tonight. I know there's several people named Howze, including my cousin Ian. and lots of guild members as well. And each one of you probably has a few different things that you want from this. So I wasn't quite sure what to do. Anyhow, let's pile right in and see how we get on. So one of the things I've done here is to produce a few little vignettes of people that are in our study. And if you're not American, you may not know this guy, or even if you are American, you may not know this guy, but you certainly know his product, because generations of young American children have learned to cook using something called the Easy Bake Oven that was designed by Ronald Howze, who hailed from Cincinnati and died shortly after we started this study in 2010. And I actually found out about him through my daily Google News feed, which was in place even in those days. And wonderful photograph there. I think they've sold 30 million of these Easy Bake ovens, so you can see how popular a toy it is. And it's basically a light bulb, but people have learned to cook on it for many a year now. And if you're at all familiar, or maybe you're not familiar with these Easy Bake ovens, but you probably have heard of something called a spirograph. And Ronald Howze was instrumental in redesigning that as a children's toy. This was all in his spare time. His main job was to be a scientist, sort of inventor chap for the US Department of Defense. That's a very interesting chap. Okay, here's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you the headline to start with, talk about why we took this on, what we've done, in case you haven't sort of detailed view of what we've done, the tools that we use to do the work, description of who does the work, at least who does it currently, and how's the internet helped us and hindered us, a few key points for success, and some thoughts about backup and continuity, followed by your questions at the end. And hopefully you'll have plenty of time for questions. All right, bottom line on top. So when we first started this, my third cousin Ian and myself, we realized at a very early stage that we did a few numbers, and we realized this was so big that we couldn't possibly do it all on our own. So we needed help. And that drove the really big decision that we made, which was to go online in September, let's see now, it would be September 2008, when we first went online with about 5,000 people in our database. And we did that to show people what we wanted to do and to show them what we'd done so far and to try and encourage them to want to contribute. And I think it's worked, but we've tried really hard to involve people, to collaborate with them, to reconstruct their families so as to add value. So there are, you know, when I started this 14 years ago, there were lots of one-name studies that most people at the time seemed to think that gathering data sets was the important thing to do. That's great if you want to work on your own, but if you'll never finish your one-name study doing it that way. So we wanted to find other people named Howze who get excited and want to help us out. So we reconstructed families. That's our primary job in order to add value to the customer. And we asked them for help. And this point here about don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, many is the conversation I've had with other guild members that say, oh, I'm not ready to go online yet with my one-name study. And to which my answer now is, hey, look, you know, I went online with 5,000 people and we're now within an ace of 200,000 people in reconstructed family groups. So this is a strong hint to other guild members. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. What you've got already is good. See if you can perfect it with the help of others. And just a little caution here. Sometimes I do advocate too much, and my whole purpose this evening in going through my study is to say, hey, here's how I do it. By all means, there may be something that is useful to you in how I go about things, but don't necessarily assume it's exactly the same, because our studies, our surnames, and our personalities are all quite different. So I'm not advocating that you copy it, even if sometimes it sounds like it. It's simply trying to give you good ideas. If you get a good idea, hey, you might even come up with something new. So all power to you. Probably the most famous Howze in recent years has been Sally Ann Howze, who unfortunately died last year. But she was the top actress in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Her family, a film in which she co-starred with a very famous guy called Dick Van Dyke. Sally Ann came from a famous family of acting Howze. Her father, Bobby Howze, was a very well-known music hall artist and film actor in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Okay, so why did we take this on? And this is just me talking for the moment, but I was stuck on 3 different ancestral lines of people named Howze, all of which came from Norfolk. So my dad had 2 separate lines of ancestors named Howze, and my mum had another one. Couldn't see any specific Howze resources on the web. In doing my own family tree, I'd come across my 3rd cousin, Ian, and together we decided, hey, there's a chance here to become the expert on our name. And for me particularly, it was an opportunity to give back to the community. You know, I've been fortunate in life. I've been retired 12 years now, and this is what I do. Some people run for charity or go on charity walks. Some people build houses. This is what I do. And it'll be fun, they said. Well, yeah, it has been. It's been a lot of fun. So much so that I'm this is pretty much my full-time occupation when I'm not golfing or sailing. If I press that button enough times, I'll get to the next screen. There we go. So we did a little scoping right at the beginning just to see what we might be taking on. And at the time, I was primarily interested in the surnames Howze and Howse, H-O-W-E-S and S-E. And we just looked at those and went, well, you know, 6,500 people in the UK, can't be too many more around the rest of the world. Let's have a crack at it. And then it became apparent to us while we were working that the surname Howse, or as it's pronounced maybe in the past, Howze, was very frequently used as a substitute for either of the other 2 names in parts of or in quite a lot of the Thames Valley, through Gloucestershire up to Birmingham in southern England. So we thought, well, we had to add this in. The one thing that we didn't take into account when we made that decision, if you look at the table here, you'll see the numbers of people named Howze in 1880 census in the US and 1881 in the UK. One thing I didn't notice was that there are 11,000 people named Howze in the US in 1880. Yeah, we guessed there'd be a few, but didn't imagine there'd be that many. And it turns out that there's a secondary source of people named Howze in the States, and they're primarily Germans, and their original surname was probably Howse, H-A-U-S, and we certainly found a few people with that surname. And so because they were a secondary source, and there are a lot of them, they're now more numerous than people with 2 original spellings in our study. Anyhow, the points at the bottom here are very important. We can't do it on our own, even before I figured that, saw that red number. And we don't do how. Believe it or not, there are more than twice as many people named How as Howze, however you spell it. And we don't have enough hours in the day to do the plural sounding names, let alone the singular sounding names. I do keep a list of people who express interest in it and try and get people to take it on as a team, but nobody's done that yet. What's happening here? Here's an interesting chat. Royal Earl Howze is an American inventor. And what you see in front of you is absolutely crucial to our being together tonight, because it may not be obvious from the pictures, but those two machines are printing telegraphs. So the original telegraph, as you probably know, was designed by one Samuel Morse. And Royal Howze came across this and went, it'd be pretty easy to turn Morse code into actual text and print it out. So that's what he did. And over the years, Samuel Morse got very unhappy with him and took him to court and lost. And eventually they put their business together. So Royal Earl Howze is probably the inventor of something like ASCII code for those of us who've been in computers for quite a while. You know what that means. A means of taking bits and bytes and turning them into letters. Amazing story. And not only he was an inventor, but his nephew actually invented the machine to make shredded wheat, of all things, and designed speedboats. So there's quite an inventive family. So, all right, back to the study. What do we do? What have we done? Well, today we cover 7 surnames. I'll scratch around and add a few more that sound like it, anything that sounds like that. So there's a very old name called Howze or Howis maybe, which was written H-O-W-Y-S. We haven't really gone back far enough to find a whole load of those. We update our website every week because we're really active. I work on the study most days. Frequently, my cousin Ian will send me files that he's worked on. I'll add those in. We've produced a monthly newsletter pretty much every month since October 2008. So there's well over 150 of those. We've got a bunch of pages on notable people. There's an entire website, web page, which has links to Howze websites. And I don't just mean places where you can find the name Howze, but actual websites and businesses that are run by people named Howze. So we have a lot of musicians, we have a golf course designer, a bunch of management consultants, stained glass window designer. It's absolutely amazing. And I produced that webpage because I thought, here's a great way of showing the diversity of occupations in the world today. So you can find that on my website if you're interested. And we've done a bunch of research and thinking on our name. But here's the crucial thing. We've had 1,700 people sign up to register on our site and get my monthly newsletters. Some of them have unregistered since, but my newsletter goes out to about 1,200 active correspondents these days and is actually read by between 400 and 500 of those. So I'm really pleased. I get lots of feedback from people saying, I really look forward to your newsletter every month. And that's great because if I can maintain interest in the website, it encourages people to feel like they own a piece of it. And if they own a piece of it, they're going to care a little bit more about how to keep it up, about keeping it updated, which is absolutely what I want. We have this evening, we're within 70 people of 199,000. Probably by the beginning of November, we will be over 200,000 people in reconstructed family groups. For those of you of a more technical background, our GEDCOM file, that is the computer file that holds all of our data, is well over 7 million lines. It has 143 megabytes. Almost all of it has been typed in by hand. There are no images in that 143 megabytes of text. I talked earlier about having a checklist. So one of the key ones here is just so that we can get an idea of our progress. I'm very fortunate in England and Wales to have a comprehensive database of births, marriages and deaths since 1837. And between 1837 and 1980, there are about 33,700 marriages of people named Howze. We know the identity, and they're actually in our database. So We know the identities of 27,000 of those, and almost 10,000 of those 33,000 marriages, we know the date and place. So we've made an awful lot of progress in 14 years. Beyond that, we have 4,300 images, a lot of which are certificates, but there are photographs of people or groups of people, like marriage photographs. We love those. Headstones, churches where people got married or were baptized, where people lived. Encourage people to send images in because it helps to tell the story. Pictures are a lot more evocative than just a bunch of facts. And I'm pleased to say that I checked our website last month. We loaded 80,000 web pages to various people who'd come across the website. So that's a lot, and I'm very pleased with that. So what do we use to do all this stuff? We use a database called Family Historian, which is a British software package, has a number of advantages, which I talked about to Guild members back in February earlier this year. For web display, we use some software called TNG, the next generation. As I said, we've been using that since September 2008. Very, very happy with it, and all the developments that have happened since we started using it. Our monthly newsletters go into a bulletin board, which uses PHP Bulletin Board 3 software. It's free. For sending out emails, we send out so many emails now that we can't use the free software that comes with TNG, so we have to use MailChimp, and I get to send, as I said, 1,200 emails. I can send 1,200 emails once a week. We keep it just down to once a month. It's quite enough. With regard to backups, we use a cloud-based file exchange program called box.com. I was an early adopter and got 50 gigabytes for free, which has been an absolute boon. The few master indexes and lists of marriages and births and so on that we use a free software called LibreOffice. The Guild of One Name Studies provides us with a web page, an archive, a web page called a profile page, where you can just learn a summary of our study, an archive where we keep indexes of births, marriages, and deaths, and a totally mirror website to our main website, which is at housefamilies.com. But I use that so that it benefits all the Guild members who can do searches on the same data. Sources we use, if you can find it on the web, we use it. I've been to many archives in the UK. I've had a whole day once in the Jackson, Mississippi archives, and obviously a load of time in Salt Lake City at the Family History Library there. And one worth mentioning is 243 other one-name studies where people have been helpful enough to provide information on people named Howze or the parents of somebody who married a Howze. We don't study them, but we're quite happy to note the names as a help for other researchers. Right, here's a nice gentleman that has both a stamp and a coin with his image on that, or with his name on them at least. This is Sir Neville Howze, who was Australia's first Victoria Cross winner, and he won that in the Boer War back in 1900. And interesting, because the Aussies claim him as one of their own, but he was born in Somerset in England, and he died in Kensington in England. Fair play. He'd emigrated to Australia before he went to South Africa in the war. And subsequent to that, he became Australia's Minister of Health. And then, I've forgotten the name of it now. It's not Governor General. It's like an ambassador from Australia to the UK, and Consul General or something like that. and he was performing that duty for the Australian government when he died back in England in 1930. But interesting, not many one-name studies can boast of a stamp and a coin. Okay, so who does the work? It's my cousin Ian and myself who do most of the work. We set the standards, we talk about them a lot. I'll probably come back to that. We both do research and data entry. In addition to that, I manage the actual website. You know, I run the updates once a week, take the backup copies and so on. I set the direction of the website, and I'm the primary person who interacts with customers, which is kind of great fun because I used to have a job like that when I was a consultant, and I very much feel like I've continued my work into retirement, because one of the great things of my old job was I had no idea what the person would be talking about when the phone rang. And it's very much the same with the customers who send me emails. I have no idea where they're going to go. We've done all kinds of stuff for them, and it's been great fun. So we have Judith and Chris in Leicestershire. Judith was born a Howze, and they came to me a long time ago and said, we really like solving puzzles, what can we do? And so we talked about it for a few weeks and came up with the idea that they would try and track down all of the people named Howze who had died serving their country. So we went through the Commonwealth War Graves website, and if my memory is correct, there are about 720, mostly men, who died for their country, named Howze, and we've identified all but 50 of them. It's probably a little bit less than that now. And the ones that are left are pretty tricky to try and solve. We haven't gotten to the bottom of several of them. So they've extended their problem solving, and I had an email from them this evening with another obituary. So they're the ones that get the primary feed of daily feed of obituaries. And they take that person and whatever details they can find out about them and work their family back until they find somebody in our database. And it's now fairly rare that they can't make a link back to anybody in the database. In other words, our coverage of Howze families around the world is pretty good. We've a gentleman called Mike in Spain, whose mother was named Howze, who manages the images on our website. There's Brian Howze in Wales, who's the co-admin of the DNA project. Lady called Sue in Gloucestershire. She transcribes wills. Just to say she transcribes wills, it's not enough. She transcribes wills and tries to figure out the family structure of the old landed Gloucestershire gentry, many of whom were named Howze, and some of whom married each other, which made life pretty complicated. There's a gentleman called Bob in Lincolnshire, Bob Howze in Lincolnshire, who's not a formal member of our team, but he regularly sends me updates on the Norfolk families on our website. Then we've got another 900 correspondents of our 1,700 correspondents who've sent in some of their own data. Sometimes it's just information on one or two people. Sometimes it's a whole family structure or a GEDCOM file. It varies a lot. But without all of those people, we could not possibly have come as far as we have. So huge thanks to all of them. Has the internet helped? Probably this is pretty obvious these days, but the explosion of online data. I was naive enough to think back in 2008 when we started this that actually we might have a chance of capturing all of the information on people named Howze in our study. And since then, Ancestry is probably multiplied by a factor of 100 in terms of the data they have. Same as Family Search and Find My Past and My Heritage. And there's probably now too much stuff that we know we'll never finish. On the other hand, we may be able to build families for pretty much everybody. So that's the goal. I told you about the automated email updates that we get. The good thing about the internet is that search engines do our marketing for us. So if you go to the website and you type in, I don't know, pick one, William Johnson Howze, and you type in that name, chances are our website will be on the first page of the search results. So it's really great. I probably get 1 or 2 emails a month saying, hey, I Googled this name and your website came up. It's great for speed, convenience, accuracy, compared with the old days when at best you had a transcript to work from. Now you can see the original images. And if the transcription's good, maybe you can copy and paste the transcription. There's obviously less need to go to the local library or some other physical building. And I move around a lot. I split my time between Florida and Norfolk, and it really doesn't matter where I am because I just sit down and start working again. So that's been really good. And sorry for repeating one of those phrases on that slide. Now, the internet's been an incredible boon, but it's also hindered us a little bit. There's a load of instant junk out there, a load of badly researched trees. The internet makes it all seem very easy, and it's not. So that's why we keep our website there and don't put our tree on Ancestry or anything like that, because we want people to come to us as the resource regarding our name. And there are differing privacy standards around the world. So getting information out of Australians and Canadians, and no disrespect, is a lot more difficult than getting information out of Americans. And I've even had more than one South African person say, hey, we don't want our data to be hidden at all, just put it all out there live. And I can't do that because we have to have one privacy standard that applies to everybody. Hackers promoting little blue pills. Yeah, at one point I made my bulletin board with my monthly newsletters completely open, and naively thought, oh, I might get more discussion that way. Instead, all I got was hackers promoting these little blue pills, and so I had to stop that. I'd say lack of sleep is a big problem. I call it CAPS, continuous addictive problem solving, with the emphasis on the addictive bit, because like many other genealogists, I'm up till 2 in the morning frequently, and it's a lot easier to do that when you're on the trail of something interesting which you found on the internet. Oh, right, this guy. What you see on the left there is the US Medal of Honor. So it is the American equivalent of the Victoria Cross. And as you can see, General Robert Lee Howze is what the Americans call a badass. It's very obvious when you see his picture. He won the Medal of Honor back in the Spanish-American War, as I recall, and he became the commandant of the US Army Training School at, oh no, brain's gone, memory's stopped. It's up the Hudson Valley. Doesn't matter, it'll come back to me. But he also had a US Navy ship named after him. West Point, that's it. He was the commandant of West Point. Another interesting guy. His son actually was also a general, didn't win the Medal of Honor, but did write the definitive book on helicopter warfare. How's the internet hindered? Look at all this lot. This is all the different ways that I've noted of people transcribing the word Howze. My favorite ones are in red here, but you can see all kinds of weird stuff there. I do that just for a laugh. I noted that just for a laugh. Right, a few time-saving hints. Use Family Historian. It's got 3 clipboards. You know what a clipboard is. It's where you go Control X and Control C and Control V to paste. Okay. Family Historian has 3 of those. It has the regular one that all programs have, but it also has one for sources and one for places, and it makes it very easy, especially if you're entering lots of data, which my cousin and I do. It's fabulously useful. Also has a type ahead feature for places and occupations and lots of other good things. But those are real time savers when you're adding lots of data. Here's one that I use frequently on Find a Grave. A wonderful website. It's now, I think, my 6th or 7th most frequently used source. When you find a family on Find a Grave, follow the whole family and note all the Find a Grave details, and then go back and fill some of the gaps. Because what you find is there are children missing, obviously that they were buried somewhere else. But the main thing is, I find that you can get lost in the complexities of adding stuff. Census information, let's say, occupational stuff, or draft registration cards. And if you do that, if you do all of that for each one person, it's quite easy to forget where you were with Find a Grave, because it'll take you, you know, a good 45, 50 minutes for, let's say, for each person. If you just work the Find a Grave family and then go back and fill the gaps, it's a lot quicker and a lot easier. Don't hesitate to use published family histories. And again, it's the same sort of process. My biggest contribution, single contribution to my study, was the published work of Colonel Bob Howze, who sadly died a couple of years ago, though I got to meet him a couple of times. He wrote an absolute masterpiece. The original Howze family genealogy was to trace all the descendants of Thomas and Mary Howze, who moved to Cape Cod in 1637. The original work was done in 1892, and Colonel Bob Howze updated that in 2004. And after he died, I wrote to the owners of the book, the Dennis Historical Society, saying, look, it doesn't look like anybody's ever going to do another book like Bob did. Would you mind if I copied out the contents of that book and put it online? And they said, no, absolutely not. Go right ahead. And I think from memory, I have something like 20,000 source citations from that one book. But it's been absolutely fabulous. And I've gone back and I've actually improved it, or improved on his work, because he was working on the basis of letter writing and actually going to state archives, particularly Massachusetts, to get his information. But I can see more information from my armchair in an evening than he could have possibly have seen in the course of his life. So I have every reverence for Colonel Bob and his work, and I'm feeling really pleased that I managed to improve on it. We use a very simple approach towards sourcing. A lot of people are fret about sourcing, and part of the reason that caused me to take another look at sourcing, or a different look at sourcing, was noticing that when I was trying to do sourcing properly, my database was rapidly filling up with long strings of text that had the word ancestry.com in every single one of them practically. And I realized that if I put this stuff online, my database was basically going to be a huge advert for Ancestry, and it would take too long and my work would be too slow. So I simplified it by going, yep, we'll use 1880 Census USA, or 1871 Census England and Wales, or Parish Register Baptisms, or World War II draft registration card, and keep things very simple. And that way you can pick something from a list, double click on it, and you've done the source for that, whatever fact that you've entered. We use something called relative sourcing as well, which is something like death report father, or pick another example. If you're working through a baptism register and you find a William Howze who was a son of a Henry, you want to note William Howze's name and his baptism date and perhaps his birth date and where he was born, if the baptism register holds that. But frequently a baptism register will have the parents' names and the parents' occupation, and sometime, or very frequently after 1813, in England and Wales, it will have the parents' abode as well. So rather than basically to simplify the sourcing there, we say, right, we'll enter William's information with parish register baptisms, and then his parents' information will simply say baptism record son. It makes it very fast, and it means I only have to use one source for multiple different circumstances. That saves a lot of time. So I'm getting near the end of the presentation now, and I'm going to try and sum up by talking about a few key things. Key one, I feel like we're in business. So we're in a market here. We're in a market for our customers' time. So we have to do what we can to improve the site visibility and what's called search engine optimization basics. I'm feeling like I haven't paid enough attention to that recently because I don't notice my website quite as close to the top of the list as it used to be. So I need to go back and have another look at that. Our correspondents are our customers, so we have to be responsive to them. So I generally try and reply to most emails within a day of receiving them and get quite a lot, 3, 4, 5 a day. On average, yeah, every day. I talked about adding value by reconstructing families. We take that a little bit further too by looking at children and grandchildren of Howze women. You learn a lot from doing that. Sometimes you find where cousins will marry. I've got 200 instances of cousins marrying in our database. But also you find that people might Google one of those grandchildren's names and find their Howze ancestry as a result. So it's another way of bringing people to our one name study. Like any business though, you've got to balance marketing and your sales effort with production. So occasionally in the past, I've done too much marketing and I've gotten way behind with my emails. And as any business person will tell you, if your marketing and sales get out of whack with production, customer complaints start coming in and you've undone a whole load of good work. So we try never to let quality slip. We pay a lot of attention to formatting of different things in our database. I'll probably talk a bit more about that in a couple of slides. And we try hard to build trust and keep it. So this isn't my effort, it's a we. It's one of the things that was drummed into me when I was a management consultant. It's about we, not the I. There's no I in team, all that stuff. Another interesting guy here, born in Somerset, Thomas William Howze. He came from a small village called Stoke St Gregory, that's it, in Somerset. And he left there and went to New Orleans and became an ice salesman and made some money, got into the ice cream business, and eventually he got into the banking business. And it turned out he was financing the growth of the city of Houston and a good part of the Confederate war effort in the 1860s. He had a couple of famous sons, one of whom was a chap called Colonel Howse, who was one of the very top advisors to President Woodrow Wilson during and after the First World War. So key point number 2, common standards. So our goal is every fact should be independent of who enters it. In other words, anybody coming along to our site shouldn't be able to tell whether it was me or Ian or anybody else has entered the data, because it all should be to work to the same standard. We try that with dates and places, especially, but we also note all the name variations of each person in the database. It makes it very helpful. You can find people in using Family Historian when you do it that way. We have a very consistent approach to place names. So if you're working on your own with your own database, and somebody lives in, let's say, Illinois, you might finish that address with USA or United States or United States of America. And if you're only using that database for your own purposes, it really doesn't matter. If you start putting your data online, though, you have to pay a lot more attention to that stuff, because it reads differently, and the computer treats those three options, USA, United States, or United States of America, it treats them as three different place names. And then we have a consistent approach to estimating years of birth. I won't go into any detail here, but we use the same rule between us. And because people use different standards for their own work, but ours are completely consistent across our database, we now always check and rekey any information that we're provided, let's say in a GEDCOM file, and we add to them if we can while we retype it. Okay, backing up and continuity. So when I'm working, I make at least daily backup copies of my master file, have an external hard drive that updates itself every 10 minutes. Our website itself contains all of the master file, and obviously the website itself is also backed up by our ISP. We have the mirror website in the Guild's members websites project, which itself is backed up. Then when I update the website, I put a weekly copy of the master file into my online storage at box.com. My cousin Ian comes along and he downloads that onto his computer. So we've got so many copies of our master file. The absolute worst that would happen in a complete disaster is we lose a few days' work. Also use iDrive, which provides Wi-Fi and cloud backup. So even despite all of those things, the one thing that's nagging me in the back of my mind is the best backup is human continuity. So we're all of us getting on a bit now, and we need to find somebody out there who will take over our work and build on it, just as we've managed to build on Colonel Bob House's work. 3 key learnings from our study. I said right at the beginning that we needed help, and what we found is that people are really happy to help. If you show them what you can do and share what information you have, people are very willing to reciprocate. They'll send you back information about their own family, they'll send you pictures, and they'll even donate money. We've probably had £2,000 or £3,000 worth of donations over the years, including one from a particular gentleman, which he called an early legacy. Very kind of him. I try and match all funds donated so that we can buy a lot of certificates with that money. Learning number 2, 4 eyes are better than 2, almost always. I talked to my cousin Ian about, it's great that he looks at his data perpendicularly to the way I look at my data. It's so good that we'll both look at the same thing and have different thoughts about it, and between us we'll get to the right answer. I find the same working with correspondents too. They're grateful for having somebody else look over their data, even though it's something they're not very used to. But in the end, learning number 3, nobody researches their family as diligently as a family member. I've been staggered over the years to find people coming up with the most obscure facts that they found about their family. One of the most impressive things was a gentleman who came from a family of Howze clockmakers, and he'd managed to find the time and the energy to write to the London Guild of Clockmakers, where his ancestor had been a member, and I think was even the master of the guild, and stuff like that. It's just so impressive when you see it. So I don't have the time to do all little details for every one of 200,000, ultimately 400,000 people in our study. All right, here's maybe the most famous Howze of all, Seth Benedict Howze, who ran one of the world's first transatlantic businesses. He was from New England originally, and came to London in the late 1840s. Appears in the 51 and 61 census in the UK. He married a British woman over here, then went back to the States, and was an enormous self-publicist. He called it his circus that he took back with him, Howze Great London Circus. And as you can see, it's gained an apostrophe in that poster there. He was so successful that he sold his circus. He was the first circus guy in the US, by the way, to have an elephant. He was so successful that he sold his circus to one P.T. Barnum and invested the proceeds in Chicago real estate in the 1890s and made an absolute killing. When he died, he was worth either $2.9 million or $29 million, depending on which newspaper you read. And among other things, if you see on the right-hand side here, there's a beautiful golden chalice. His wife, being British, donated that chalice to York Minster when she died. And so I asked one of my correspondents to go and take a picture of it for me, which he did. Okay, where are we now? Oh, there's a bunch of other stories here which we can go through when you ask some questions, if you like. I'll leave this up here for a minute, but 7 wives, that's a good one. If you've heard of the Hatfields and the McCoys, Devil Ence Hatfield's daughter was married a Howze, and so he's in our database. Unfortunately, all of human life is here, so we have 2 young black girls named Howze who were lynched, and a black man in Mississippi whose cause of death on his death certificate was legal hanging. It sent a shiver down my spine when I saw that. And I've looked in newspapers ever since to try and find any news about what might have happened when that guy met his demise, but no, nothing. It's completely quiet. So we had one man on the Titanic, another one on the US Arizona during Pearl Harbor. Neither of those guys survived, but among many, many stories that we have from our website. That's it. If you have questions, I'll be happy to take them. Assuming everybody's still alive. How are we doing, Julie?
Just had to unmute myself and then couldn't find the button.
Okay.
Isn't it always the way? You'd think I'd know, wouldn't you? I'm here pretty much every month doing this, and every month I do exactly the same thing. And I'm sure that talks about my sanity. Anyhow, there are no questions. I cannot believe it. There are no questions. Okay, so the story about the lynchings.
Yeah.
Is that the same? I mean, have you found examples in other states in the South of the
not
US?
yet, but I haven't, honestly, I haven't been out there looking for them. There is a database of lynchings, and as I recall, there were only these 2 young girls listed in there, because I was looking for my legal hanging chap as well, and I can't find anything about him. It's a big mystery. And as noted, that was the one day when I happened to be in the Mississippi State Archives in Jackson, Mississippi, because we were taking an afternoon off while we were driving from Florida to Dallas, Texas.
I think that's the thing with the one name study, is that beyond, as you're building your families up and adding to the and add into the study is that you can choose who you want to delve deeper in, so that you're able to provide just some other stuff
Yeah,
beyond the
and you know, we're
born
all of
married.
us nosy, aren't we? But doing a one-name study allows you to be nosy in other people's families.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just
And of
kind of
course,
fun.
well,
Um,
exactly. And of course, to every marriage, there is, there are two people. So on a marriage certificate, you're going to have at least two names, maybe more. And you're able to use those links into other studies. And that's what I quite like doing, is cross-pollinating. And I kind of got that idea from you in terms of how you, and you showed me yesterday around how you managed to acknowledge other studies where there is
mm,
this link between parties. I've just seen a couple of questions that have come in. Bear with me a second, because the box is just a tad small and I can't read all of it. Um, I'm
You want
sure
me to
I've
do it?
um, I'm sure I've just seen a question there that someone's asked if you feel
Somebody's
like.
asked. Natalie asked, how do you deal with the accuracy of trees donated by others?
well, in two ways, Paul. The first way I dealt with them was to simply copy them into my file. And after doing that for about a year, my database became a complete disaster, which is why I realized that it's important to pay attention to how you format things, because everybody works to different standards, whether it's place name, for example, is West Ham in London or Essex? It could be either, depending on your own personal preference. But if your website picks one way and somebody gives you data that shows something different, then it doesn't look very good when your website. I need to show people this. Hold on, I'm going to show you what I mean.
Okay.
Get out of this website here and go to the internet and go to my website, housefamilies.com. If I click on places, for example, we've got 21,000 places here with that end in USA. And if I click on USA, I get a list of about 56 places. There are 50 states. Oh, I've got one wrong here. Sullivan, Missouri does not have a comma between Sullivan and Missouri, so that's why it's 56 and not 55. But you see what I mean? If I'd used United States or United States of America, I wouldn't get a clean result like this. I wouldn't, for example, if I click on Florida, I mostly get a list of all the counties in Florida. Is it working? Let's click on that properly. Yeah, here we go. So place list, Florida. These are mostly counties. There's a few misprints in here. Like I see St. John's County, where I live, has got 3 different spellings there, which I need to fix. But if you don't spend time formatting your addresses properly, you won't be able to get nice, neat examples, answers like this. So
Okay.
back to your question. No, back to your question. Hold on. Back to your question. And so that's how I used to do it. The website got so bad. It was what's the word? Inconsistent in the way we showed stuff, that we now don't copy anything. I'll take somebody's GEDCOM file and I will retype the whole thing, at least the bits relevant to Howze, and do it that way.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
Do you enter parents of people even if you don't have dates of birth for them?
Yes. And the reason why I do that is because I don't want to throw the information away. And so 2 relevant things here. If the person is not named Howze, but they marry a Howze, and I know who their parents were, I'll simply note the names. If the person is a Howze and I know that his parents were Henry and Anne, I will put Henry and Anne as separate people, and then I will type not known in their address field, so that, or let's see, I put not known in the address field for a death fact. That way, any program looking at that will know that, oh, there's a death fact, they must have died. If there's a chance that that person was born in the last 100 years, then I will estimate a year of birth like 1925, let's say. So it won't appear online until 100 years hence.
Do you have a standard? Do you sort of take 25 years as the date of birth for a father and mother, for instance?
Yeah, I try not to estimate too much because sometimes you can miss.
No, I realise that.
So the only time we'll do that is when somebody's obviously less than 100 years old, and we need to put a year of birth in there, even if it's an estimate, so that that person doesn't appear online.
Yeah.
So we've about 200,000 people in our database, and about 60,000 of those you can't see.
Yeah. Next question, which is funny. Do you ever have a yearning to study a different name?
Nah, I've got quite enough to do here. If somebody else wants to study another name, I'll help them all I can.
And somebody else asked, who was the earliest Howze you have found?
Oh, right. That's an interesting question. There is a Richard Howze who died in 1427, and I can track all his descendants right through to a gentleman who died in about 1969. So those are all people named Howze. There are living descendants, but the name Howze is, as we say, daughtered out. So there aren't any Howze descendants of that family, as far as I'm aware. I live in hope of finding one.
Yeah.
And the reason why I know it's 1427 is because of wills. They were a landed family, and they left lots of wills.
Yeah.
I've got to ask Paul, just at the very beginning, you spoke about how you had 3 separate lines of Howze, 2 on your dad's side and 1 on your mum's.
Yeah.
I'm guessing, I mean, I've got similar issues with other surnames in other parts of the country, whereby the marriage pool was so much smaller, so they just kept the same names keep popping up. But were your 3 lines of Howze really connected to each other beyond any marriage?
I haven't found so yet. And the reason is that, Howze is about as common as Smith in Norfolk. And the 3 families are from relatively different geographical areas. At least, they were far enough apart in olden times that people wouldn't have accidentally gone from one place to another. That said, I've got a lot of people named Howze who married other people named Howze in the database. There's something like 200 marriages, maybe more. And a good portion of those were people on Cape Cod, where there was a lot of, what's the word called? Endogamy. So a lot of people on Cape Cod married other people on Cape Cod.
Yeah.
A, because it's geographically fairly far from places like Boston, and B, because they were seafaring families and so on, and that they had seafaring in common. So they mixed in those kind of world. There's one instance I got from the Boston Globe newspaper where they listed 4 marriages somewhere on the Cape. I think it may have been Yarmouth or Dennis. And of the 8 people involved in those 4 marriages, as published in the Boston Globe, 7 of them were named Howze.
Oh, you have my sympathy. There's just another just another point that on one of the slides you had towards the end,
Yeah.
you put something, a really basic sentence, and it said geography is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And that is why studies are global. And it's really important that the global thing, I mean, you do everything in a kind of a, you have to start somewhere. But even though you look back and people were more migratory than we think, even if they
Definitely.
only move from one end of the country to the other.
Definitely.
So I think that statement, whilst it appeared on the, just reading it, kind of just a basic statement, for people that are doing a one name study, you shouldn't restrict it on geography. Yes, you're going to restrict it as you start your study and build it up.
I quite agree. And actually, if I could kind of continue your theme there, Julie, I actually think that once your study starts to become mature, you would be well served by looking at all the people with your study surname in India or China or South Africa, or in my case on St Helena. I've got 50 people who were born in St Helena in my database. Though if you find those people and you can put them in their family context, it saves you worrying what happened to those people later on when you've got a mess of William Howze around and you can't figure out which one went where. At least if you've done all the William Howze that lived in China, and you put those in a proper family context, it saves you worrying about them. So I'd encourage people to look for their study surname in unusual places. One of the things I did some years ago, we all know Bob Cumberbatch, and I was talking with Bob about his study surname, which is Cumberbatch, and he was saying how when he writes to other people named Cumberbatch, sends them a message on Facebook, he frequently will get a reply. In my case, that's not the case, because I did try it. However, I did find, or I did start looking for people with unusual given names. So there's a gentleman called Agustin Howze, who lives in Argentina. And I sent him a Facebook message, and although his English isn't great and my Spanish isn't great, we're friends on Facebook. And I learned that his family came from Norfolk originally and went out for a gold rush in Paraguay in the 1850s, and they stuck around. So yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, and it adds masses of color to your research when you find stuff like that.
Yeah, and also if you look at names through, say, the Second World War, and with the amount of displacement there is, it's really important because you have to look somewhere for them. So if you had somebody who was taken from, say, Poland to Austria, there were other events that happened, so they may have died, they maybe had a baby, they did all those things, but the birth or the paper trail of that event, whatever the event was, will be somewhere else than where it should have been, perhaps, had there not been a war.
Completely agree. I've some experience of that because my daughter-in-law is Jewish, and I've done some work on her ancestors, but with my study name being relatively English, it has one part of which has a Germanic root. I haven't had to face that particular issue too badly. Not too many people named Howze were actually physically displaced during the war from one country to another. I could easily see that as an issue for, say, Orlando as a name.
Yeah, certainly I found 3 Orlandos in Dachau concentration camp.
Yeah, exactly.
And their story was that they were actually militaries, they were really prisoners of war. But because of how Germany viewed the Italians after their surrender, they were treated just as harshly as the Jewish in terms of the walking, the distance, and how they were treated in the various camps and the movement of those people. So I think it's important. I think even if you've got a a British name, go and look and just see what comes up. And some people will get, you know, a gem, and other people will get nothing, but you've wasted what, 3 seconds in just putting your
No,
surname
absolutely.
in.
I didn't mean to discourage people
Yeah.
from doing that. I'm just saying it's unlikely for my study, but
Yeah.
there are people named Howze in Brazil with my surname, and I know for sure.
Yeah.
And South Africa and Zimbabwe now have a lot more data than was available 10 years ago. And I really should spend more time on those places just to eliminate all of those families, or, you know, join them all back to their families in England, and then worry about the other ones I can't find.
Jackie asks, apart from England and Wales, which country have you found to provide extensive source material?
I'm sorry, Paul, say that again. Which country?
Apart from England and Wales, which
Yeah.
country have you found to provide extensive source material?
Oh, provide. Well, everywhere, really. You know, we can moan about not having census availability for Australia and New Zealand, but there's still plenty of stuff out there that you can use. The US is by far the best documented, although, you know, the difference between the US and the UK is the completeness of the records. So we're very fortunate, you know, starting life as British genealogists, to have that almost complete database of births, marriages, and deaths. We're very lucky. Frequently, if you go to some of the US states, you won't find that degree of completeness even in the first decade of the 20th century in some places. Other places are much better. The relatively newly available records for New York City are fantastic, and they should not be ignored by any genealogist. They're absolutely brilliant because people went from all over the world, sometimes to get married in New York, but they'd stay in New York for a few years on their way somewhere else. So they maybe had a child there. And I thoroughly recommend looking at the New York City records.
Yeah.
I just wish New York State and Connecticut were and New Jersey was readily available.
Yeah. Una asks, how many families do you have where everyone disappears from the record? Where do you suspect they went?
Too many to count is the answer to that. Not every family ends up coming to you know, the present day. Oh gosh, I don't know. There's all kinds of decrements out there, you know. People falling in a canal and an unidentified body being pulled out several parishes down the canal, and nobody's ever identified it, so there's no death certificate. People disappearing off for gold rushes and or traveling to the Midwest or the west of the US before records began, same as Canada. You know, we'll never find all the answers.
Yeah.
Though DNA will point us into a whole load of potential answers that we haven't thought of.
Yeah. Another question. Marie says, how did your house get to St Helena?
Good question. On ship. No, they were in the military, the same as I think there's about 100, well over 100, maybe 150 people who were born in Gibraltar. Same reason, you know, St Helena was a major staging post for steamships on the way to and from India. So they would call it St Helena or Cape Town, and you know, fuel up for the next part of their journey.
Right, there's another question from Una that says, she just wants to know, where all the children reach adulthood and disappear from the record, so they migrated somewhere, or are they all in a mass grave? I guess
I don't know the context of the
when
question.
yeah, I'll read you exactly what it says. So, my question is about where all the children reach adulthood and disappear from the record. So they migrated somewhere, or are they all in a mass grave?
I would say it's unlikely they're all in a mass grave unless they got very unlucky. I don't know the context, so you know, if they were in the Highlands of Scotland, the chances are they all emigrated somewhere. Question is where. And you look at known migration patterns for other people from that area. You know, people from Devon or the west coast of Scotland frequently ended up in Newfoundland, for example. And working your way through there is quite difficult, though not impossible. And whole families ended up there. So I think I posted on the Guild's Facebook page once, I had a single run of, I think it was 70 people named Howze, all in a row. So it took up, you know, best part of 2 census pages. I don't think anybody's beaten that yet.
Yeah.
Were they all connected to each other? Were they all family members?
Oh, I don't know. I never figured them all out. I had easier fish to fry than that one.
Yeah.
Linda asks, do you use DNA? And my question to answer that would be, how do you use DNA?
Okay. Yes, I use DNA a lot. I've personally helped people find their family members, whether they were adoptees, and I helped a German girl find her British parents when her father had been killed, but was known to be a Howze. I won't go into the details. We have 160 men in our DNA study at Family Tree DNA who've taken the Y-DNA test, and we have them pretty much all grouped thanks to my co-worker Brian. And I live in hope of finding another male Howze with whom I share some Y-DNA. Apart from my known cousins, none of whom have taken a Y-DNA test, I don't match with anybody. So and not even after having taken a big Y test. So I live in hope on that regard.
You're not the only one.
And there are, in addition to the 160 men, we've probably another 120 or so people who've taken autosomal DNA tests in our project. And I don't get involved in those unless I'm asked to help. And then I'm not that interested unless the issue revolves around somebody named Howze. Yeah, we've been pretty active. I want more male Howze to take DNA tests. End of.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions, I think.
Cool. Well, we've done quite well.
There's just one more. It's from Una, and she's talking about, does he have those puzzles?
I think she's talking about. I think she's talking about an original question. So,
oh, the original question.
And I think he does.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
If you like puzzles, probably once every 3 or 4 months, I'll put a puzzle in my monthly newsletter, and frequently 2 or 3 people will get back to me with the answer. It's been quite productive in that regard.
I've really enjoyed this session. I've heard you talk about Howze study before, and I've always really enjoyed hearing about it. And there's always, even though we've got a lot of members, lots of people who aren't guild members are kind of working on a similar project.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been I think it's always great to look at how someone else does a study and then see which bit would fit for you in terms of your study.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that,
as I said, I'm prone to advocating where just simply describing what I do and the reasons why I do it may be enough help to other people. They can either copy it or get a fresh idea or go, no, I don't want to do that. Because we're all different. We have different personalities and our surnames start and go to different places and so on.
But yeah, I think it's been, well, I've really enjoyed it, and I've heard you talk before, so I think that's been
Well, thank you very much, Julie.
great. Yeah, thank you. It was, and that's why I asked you to come and do this, because I hoped it would inspire some people to just get,
Flattery will get you everywhere. All right.
yeah, the perspective of treating a study like a business. I don't think many guild members take that view, and actually I think it's quite a helpful view, because I think it gives you perspective.
Positive way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really good. So thank you very much, Paul, for taking the time to spend with us.
And if anybody wants to contact me, my email addresses are down at the bottom of this page here, so feel free to write in.
The recording will be up on the website with a few useful links, and Paul's talk that he gave to Family Historian, which was part of the software series back in January, I think. I will link that, and that is available to non-members, so I will link that, and then you'll be able to access that.
Great.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll be back next month. And from memory, our talk is on the Northumberland names books, which I thought sounded rather interesting. So, and I think that is the 4th of October, I think.
Thanks a lot, Julie.
It's on the website. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you next time.